Hi, I'm Gary Berman, host of the Unsung Cyberhero Adventures podcast. Our mission is to shine the light on the unsung heroes who keep us safe online while at work, home, and school. I'm the least likely person to be interviewing some of the world's top people in the cybersecurity community and beyond, including thought leaders from large enterprises, small and medium businesses, vendors, law enforcement, the government, academia, and others, with a goal of humanizing cybercrime. Why? Here's my origin story. I started a marketing research and consulting company, and after 10 years, I was able to sell 49% to a global organization. Things were going great. And then it happened, right under my nose. A trusted insider and tech contractor essentially cloned my company. They spoofed my website, redirected incoming calls to their company, and even pretended to be whistleblowers by calling my biggest clients and saying that there was fraud in my data collection operations and that I was under investigation by the FBI and to stop all communications. Can you believe it? After a long battle, I lost everything. And it wasn't only my loss. I had to lay off all my other great people and close the company. To make a very long story short, I was unable to receive justice due to the difficulty of attribution. Well, as time passed, I learned that being a victim was just exhausting and unfortunately not very unique. So I decided that I needed to pivot from victim to advocate and to turn my experience into something that would help keep other people safe while online. Well, what next? I needed a crash course on the basics of cybersecurity. So naturally, I ordered a copy of Cybersecurity for Dummies, and after 10 pages, I was lost. That's when I realized there had to be a better way to distill complicated cybersecurity and tech information into something that all business people and their families would understand and enjoy. Not only those people in tech and cybersecurity. So, after watching Spider-Man at the movies, that's when it hit me. Superhero comics. My goal was to convert blinded, real-life stories of cybercrime into fun, engaging, empowering, and informative superhero comics and animations. The Cyberhero Adventures, Defenders of the Digital Universe was born. Having decided on the medium of superhero comics, where was I going to get the stories? Conferences! It turns out that there were hundreds of cybersecurity conferences, so I began to attend every conference that I could, and that's where I met Keith Fuentes. Hey, Keith.
How you doing, Gary?
Tell us your origin story.
Yeah, thanks for asking. Mine is kind of interesting. My whole life, I knew what I wanted to do since I was 6 years old. And my goal in life was I wanted to be an FBI special agent. It was something that I thought would be challenging physically, mentally, spiritually. It was something I thought I was born to do. So my whole life was geared towards getting to that point. I was a math major, accounting, to get my accounting degree, to become a public accountant, because that was the fastest way into the bureau. For me, it was interesting. I started working in the Silicon Valley area for KPMG. And what I found as I was working with these high-tech companies in the late 90s was just how important security was and just how important cybersecurity was going to be. Now, just to give you an example of what really drew me into cybersecurity is when I was young, I dealt with bullying when I was a kid. And it was something that really shaped my life because at one point I didn't know how I was going to survive it. It was so painful. But I was taught by someone much stronger than me at the time of the power of when you work together, when you form a team, when you have people that, if they're in a bullying situation, kind of come together to stop what's happening, they can have an impact. And I think when I look at cybersecurity, there's a lot of cyberbullying, there's a lot of the enemy or the bad actors coming together. And I don't see necessarily, and if you asked the question at one time, what keeps you up at night, is I don't see the good guys coming together in the cyber world. It seems to be everything is individualized. Companies deal with it only when the light's been shined on them. They don't protect against the bite because they don't fear the bark. So until they're bitten. So for me personally, I think what's driven me into the role I have now and the career I have had for over the last 20 years is this whole culmination of wanting to be in some type of law enforcement background, wanting to help from a technological perspective and just stop the cyberbullying. That's my background.
Well, and also, your family has quite a history in law enforcement.
Yeah, I was fortunate. I grew up in a home where many of my family members in my immediate family were in some type of form of law enforcement, whether it was police officer, highway patrol, state trooper, or even the FBI itself. So I grew up in a family where we knew a lot of the things that were going on that most people wouldn't want to talk about or wouldn't know was really happening in their neighborhoods. So growing up in that law enforcement family, I kind of had a desire to want to be on the good side. And so that's what really drove my career path all through life. And I've been fortunate enough that I can now make a career doing what I love.
Well, speaking of law enforcement, our next guest, Terry Dunlap, has had kind of the opposite coin of law enforcement, at least when he was a youngster. Tell us about that, Terry.
Yeah, I can't say that I always wanted to be the good guy of the story. When I was growing up, I was more on the black hat bad side of the story. Yeah, it was in 1985, junior in high school, had a Commodore 64 and a 300 baud modem. And I just got into all kinds of mischief. If anybody has seen War Games, I mean, it's almost like that without the global nuclear threat at the end. Stealing credit cards, dumpster diving, putting carbon copies together for those people old enough that remember credit cards having carbon copies, uploading them to BBS's, bulletin board systems, and eventually, started getting a little too crazy with what we were doing. Got arrested at 17, spent a few days in juvenile detention in the full orange jumpsuit, went to jail, and when the trial came, there really wasn't any computer laws on the books at the time. This is pre-1986 Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. So the only thing they could get us for was credit card fraud. I had a little gang going on, me and a couple other younger kids. But yeah, got in trouble and thought that was going to be pretty much the end of college and things of that nature. But ended up getting into college, studied poli-sci and econ of all things. Never took any formal computer classes. Actually, I did take one, assembly language, and I hated it and dropped it within like the first couple of weeks. But then ended up getting involved in the financial sector, worked with Deloitte and Touche, doing some high net worth management stuff. Met a guy who was into IT. He was the IT guy at the office, and I told him my story growing up, and he said, "Hey, did you now? Remember, this is like early '90s. He goes, did you know you can get paid to actually hack into companies nowadays?" And it's like, what are you talking about? I got arrested for such shenanigans. What get paid? What is all this? It's like, yeah, so it's this new thing called pen testing. They, Deloitte and the other, accounting firms try and break into these companies to see how secure they are. And so he made some introductions, and then I was on the penetration testing team for Deloitte. And then one day I found myself in Baltimore at a SANS conference. For those people that aren't familiar with SANS, it's a institute that does all kinds of computer security training. And I happened to be in a Starbucks line, and I saw somebody with a name badge that said she worked at the DoD. And I mentioned to her, I didn't know her, I mentioned to her out of the blue, I said how great it would be to work there because you guys are under constant attack and be such an engaging environment to work and learn in. So 6 months later, after I had passed her resume, I get a phone call from a recruiter, and it happened to be with the National Security Agency. I had no idea that's who she worked for at the time. So we did a phone interview. I eventually flew out there, had a interview with some people, got hired into what is now known as TAO, Tailored Access Operations, and did offensive hacking against terrorists because it was around 2000 and I was there 2002 to 2007, and a lot of the things that we did went after high value terrorist targets during that time. I eventually left, started an offensive cyber consulting company back to the government and the military, and then out of that company I created my newest one, Refirm Labs, which is more defensive in nature, helping companies protect some of the gear and IoT devices that they make. So that's my story as short as I could make it.
Wow. So, you would actually have a kind of an interesting insight, Terry, into, what motivates someone to decide, kind of, good people versus bad people, or, white hats versus gray hats. What is it? What is the number one motivation? Is it as obvious as money?
No, it's not the money. I can only speak for myself growing up and doing what I did and what we do today. And I don't know if this is the same across the board, depending on what color of the hat you wear. But I think if you're on the black hat side, it's the thrill of the game. It's the adrenaline rush of being able to get root access on a device or being able to break into something that is supposedly unbreakable. And then, as a teenager, bragging about it to your friends. I mean, hey, look at this. This is what I was able to do. I think that still happens today with script kiddies and hackers. I mean, that's how most of these younger guys get caught. They, break into some place with some SQL injection attack, and then they create a botnet of some sort, and they take out a bunch of stuff, and there's all kinds of publicity and notoriety, and they can't keep their mouth shut. And they start telling their friends, and sooner or later, someone tips off the authorities that here's the guy that did it. So I really think it's the thrill of the game, at least for me, and probably a lot of people out there.
Wow, that's interesting. And speaking of break-ins, Keith, in your role at Samsung, you've developed, quite an extraordinary series of defenses, on how to keep people safe. What's keeping you up at night about all this?
Yeah, I mean, for me, and I mentioned it earlier, that I feel like when it comes to the good side of the actors, and maybe the good's the wrong word, but if you want to say the white hat or whatever they call it, there's just a lack of collaboration. And so at Samsung, one of the things we've tried to do, and why I'm here and I choose to keep my career moving here, is we try to bring people together, whether it's corporations, partners, even podcasts like these, where we could have this discussion openly, talk about real life scenarios. I think what I love so much about the Cyber Hero Adventures is that you're taking something that is something everyone's dealing with and making it to where they can understand it, digest it, and hopefully take an action point to solve it. And I think for me, what the department I represent, which is customer success, and where we have on our side a software suite with what we utilize, Knox, as our platform play, we try to build an ecosystem. We know that no one company can do enough, Samsung included, and that what we can do, because we're a hardware manufacturer, is hopefully create a foundational piece and then open it up into the ecosystem so that others can play and utilize this framework and hopefully provide an end solution that can change the game from a customer perspective, no longer be on the defensive, but maybe get a little bit more proactive. And I like to use an analogy, and security is like brakes on a car. And I think the problem is that people have this discussion with security and they make it an insurance play and it turns people off, or they get scared of security and they kind of bury their head. But I like to use an analogy that security is like brakes on the car. The original cars that were made, you would only drive them so fast because you weren't sure if you could stop. And so you kind of regulated your own speed just for your life safety. But as cars got better and brakes got better, you started going faster. And if you look at today, I think security the same way. You can look at it and try to say, defensively, I'm trying to prevent something. I like to look at it, say, it's a business betterment. It'll allow you to drive your business faster, go to more places, use your technology in areas maybe you wouldn't have, because the security gives you that assurance. So when I look at what I like to do and why I'm here and what I think Samsung is attempting to do is try to make security not an insurance sale, but more of a betterment to your business. And we are seeing this in today's day and age with what's happening right now all across the world. And we're seeing all these workers work from home and so forth, that it will be because of security, you get back to work. And it's, again, not from a defense mechanism, but from a proactive ability to give you the same look and feel that you're used to behind the brick and mortar of your company, all the way down now to your home on a mobile device or whatever device you might be using in your digital transformation.
And you mentioned something very interesting in everybody, working from home. So, Terry, which sector or sectors of the economy do you think are most vulnerable right now, given the rapidly changing conditions on the ground? And why do you think that?
There's a few. I'd say it's probably telecommunications and like oil and gas, nuclear, your kind of critical infrastructures. Now I'll tell you why I think this. And a lot of this is dirty knowledge on where I come from. And then some of it's also based on research our companies have done since being out from the auspices of the NSA. We have seen firsthand what nation state actors can do to companies. And it's not necessarily the threats where they're actually attacking companies from the outside trying to get in. What we have seen and continue to see today is tampering with the supply chain. So let me give you an example without naming names of the innocent. There was a large European telecommunications provider that approached my company and asked, hey, we're getting ready to push these Wi-Fi routers out to our customers' homes. But before we do, can you please take a look at the firmware that runs these devices and make sure that it's secure? So typically these companies would get a third-party auditor to basically pen test, run Nmap, Nessus, Metasploit, those types of open source platforms to make sure that nothing can attack these from the outside. Well, we look at it differently. We look at it from the inside out. So when we look at the firmware, what we found was a back door. Now, at this time, it was about 2013, and the back door seemed pretty innocuous to us. It looked like an engineer had forgotten that the back door to be removed. They're usually there for testing purposes, remote testing purposes. So we told this telecommunications provider, hey, go back to the vendor, make sure they take out this back door. It looks like it was an accident. You should be fine. So a few weeks later, we get an updated firmware image for the same device. And we look at it, and there were two interesting discoveries that we had found. One, that the back door was no longer located where we had originally found it, but it was moved someplace else into the firmware image. Same credentials, same username, same password. And so I was curious, and I asked them, I said, who's the vendor of this router that you're having manufactured for your customers? And they said it was Huawei. Now, for those of you that are in the know that follow the cybersecurity space, Huawei's been in the news for the past few years for these types of tactics. But this was 2013, and nobody was really on to their shenanigans at that point, so we never really thought that much about it. But this continues to happen in telecommunications, in surveillance camera manufacturing. A lot of these high-end electronic devices coming out of China, we are finding these embedded back doors every time we look at the firmware of these devices, and it's getting more and more complicated. So they're learning that once somebody like our companies find these things, they go back to the drawing board. How can we obfuscate this even more to make it even more challenging for people like us to discover these back doors? So that's what we try and do today, is help mitigate supply chain risk by looking for these embedded things that these people are trying to put into our systems.
Wow, that's incredibly interesting. And Keith, now with the acceleration of 5G, what does a cybersecurity ecosystem look like from that perspective?
Yeah, great question. I think with 5G, I always tell this story. It's kind of like the creation of the Roman Empire. Everybody thinks the Roman Empire was built because it had the best military. The truth of the matter is it was one of the first nations, if not the first, to create a roads system that allowed them to transport their soldiers, their goods, their food faster than anyone else. And 5G is like this type of revolutionary road system that you're going to get data faster, quicker, real time in a way you may not have seen on 4G or before. And what that is kind of go back to your Spider-Man comics, it's great responsibility coming with this great power, correct? You get this great power. Now you have to have the responsibility of how you utilize it. So it gives the enemies the ability to utilize that pipe to create very sophisticated attacks and utilize the power within 5G to get to your devices. But it also enables the good guys as well to build solutions that can secure in a much stronger format and utilize that same pipe or strength of communication. Now, in the end, where I think it's going to immediately show impact, I should say, is going to be new threat vectors, because there are going to be devices you never thought were devices or endpoints coming online. Today, your car is recording tons of data. To get that data, your mechanic plugs into it. With 5G, they will have it real time all the time. So when your car crashes, those that are showing up on the scene are going to have very sophisticated data on what happened in that crash as they're arriving. Something a little bit more unique than you're used to. They'll know who was sitting where potentially if the car measures by weight, who's in what seat. They'll know how fast you were traveling at time of impact, where you want to call. All these different things and data points that can come in to play. And then how would that tie to the insurance business as well? So, I mean, there's these new endpoints coming online. They're going to have unbelievable speed, so they can give real-time data points. And then it's really going to come down to how does a corporation police and protect that data, or how do they take that data and utilize it as actionable data to maybe guide their business in a more opportune way. And I think if you look at technology like this, like 5G, that is so great in its evolution or advancement, there will be those that will adopt early and benefit the most, and there'll be others that won't adopt, and the threat will be their competition, because their competition might be someone they don't even know currently exists today. Just as if we were having this call 7-8 years ago and I brought up a word like Uber to the taxi companies, not many of them would have really listened to it. They wouldn't have thought that just writing a single app, not buying a single vehicle, just writing an app would take the person transportation business. So again, I think with 5G, you're going to see businesses erupt that you didn't envision. You're going to see companies come out of nowhere, and those that harness that strength are going to be very competitive.
You know, it's interesting. You also, going back to one of the first things you said about Rome and Romans, I'm not sure if this is true or not, but someone recently told me that the very first cybersecurity was through Roman warriors, where they actually tattooed messages on the heads of warriors or slaves, and they waited till their hair grew back. And then by the time they got to the destination, you know, there was no message, and they shaved their head, and that's how they, you know, got their messages. So that would be like probably 0G or 4G. We created a new epoch, BG, before G. So speaking of new epochs, you know, Terry, can you, without revealing anything, you know, share maybe a blinded real life story of cybercrime? You know, like kind of, you know.
Oh yeah.
What happened? What were the consequences? And most importantly for our audience, what were the lessons learned?
Well, not to kill the story, but the lesson I told earlier was relearned once again in this particular story. So this actually happened in 2017 when we launched Refirm Labs, the current company that I have that analyzes and specializes in firmware analysis and security. We were contacted by the chief digital security officer of a Fortune 100 company that everybody would recognize. And he happened to have some background in the intelligence community. And he reached out to us and said, hey, look, you know, I have some dirty knowledge about the manufacturing processes of some of the security cameras in these manufacturers out of China. We can't find anything wrong with them with our current suite of tools and consultants that come in. But I think if you guys take a look at this, you might be able to find something that we're missing. Can you take a look at these surveillance cameras that are all over, not only their corporate headquarters, but all around the world? So we said, sure. Now the cameras are made by China's second largest surveillance camera manufacturer, Dahua. So we looked at the firmware, and sure enough, we found a back door. Highly sophisticated, obfuscated, scanning tools wouldn't find it. The only way you're going to find this is by doing what we did, is extracting the firmware from the camera and then reverse engineering the firmware, looking at the assembly code and finding inconsistencies, anomalies that doesn't fit a normal computer program. And so we identified this and we told them, hey, look, this is what we found. So I would keep an eye on any type of traffic leaving your network going over to China. And so in the process, I asked him, I said, do you mind if we don't name you as the client? Do you mind if we go public with this information and write a vulnerability report? So we ended up doing that. We reached out to Dahua. We got no comment whatsoever. Within 36 hours or so of us submitting our findings to this company, the chief digital security officer sent me a text message with the firewall logs and said, I kid you not, you guys are effing spot on. Look what we found. And sure enough, there was traffic leaving this company's network going to Chinese IP addresses they didn't recognize through the surveillance cameras. And so obviously they took immediate action. They blocked all that traffic. It took them at least a month to find a new vendor to rip out the cameras to replace them. And then we went public with our findings. And what was interesting, after we released the findings, Washington Post picked it up, Forbes, Fortune, and some others. Dahua finally reached out to us and said, oh, we knew about that vulnerability. We've uploaded some new firmware that customers should use. Here's the firmware you need to check out. So we looked at the firmware, and guess what? we found the same thing that Huawei did back in 2013. It was no longer in the firmware image where we found it. It was simply moved elsewhere in the program. And we confronted this contact at Dahua and said, look, here is all the disassembly code. Here's everything we found. This is living proof that you did not remove this backdoor. You simply moved it. And the last email I got from this guy from Dahua was, well, my lead developer tells me that this is no longer an issue and it's been fixed. And my reply to him was, are you sure he works for you and not your government? Never heard another word.
Wow. Well,
and now if you look at the Defense Authorization Act of 2019, I think it was, or 2018, I don't remember what it was, but Trump had signed it. And as part of the Defense Authorization Act for that year was a government ban on Huawei, Dahua, ZTE, and some other Chinese manufactured surveillance and telecommunications gear.
Wow. That's quite a cautionary tale. Speaking of cautionary tales, one of the joys of working at home is I'm being called away by my better half. So if you guys can just address this question, Keith, I'll start with you. From a communications, perspective, both internally but then also externally, how are you communicating, through this rapidly changing environment? And hopefully, I'll be able to be back in just a couple minutes.
Sure. Thanks, Gary. Yeah, I don't know for you, Terry, but for me, everything now is webcasting, online, yes. Multimedia.
Yes.
To be honest with you, I feel like I'm working longer and harder than I ever have, even when I was traveling.
So, no, that's definitely true here. My wife, who works for the FDA, is doing the same thing. And there's what I've noticed, and maybe you've noticed this too, is that working from home like this, there's really no separation between work and home life, and it blends right into the weekends and the next day. It's crazy.
And where my team and my company has kind of pivoted to is what can we do to provide employees, companies, work from home environments, you name it, so they get back to work and back to productivity. And it's interesting, I'm finding from government regulations, for example, on manufacturing plants, the new rules of how you can't congregate and how you have to have your social distancing even while on the plant floor. That's kind of where we've pivoted to building some new kits and bundles, and we're really focused on, what can we provide that can give you a mechanism now to get yourself back to work and to get your company back online or back functionally. And it's been exciting, to be honest with you. It's kind of one of the reasons that drove me into security space, is driving me into this productivity space, which is just when you get to see someone who may have been either furloughed or forced to work from home and not able to do the job function, to go back. It's really been exciting. It's been fun to be a part of. So.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a mental shift and a productivity shift. Well, Refirm Labs, since we have a SaaS product that analyzes firmware, that company has pretty much been virtual from the start back in 2017. But my other company, the offensive government consulting company, Tactical Network Solutions, one of the things that we offer the public are live training classes. These are not cheap classes. These are like $2,000 plus classes, and they're conducted live at our corporate headquarters. And that's pretty much dried up. But what was fortunate in our case is that before all this even happened, we started to make a push to have these courses available online, on demand. So it's a massive undertaking, as you can imagine, to take these very complex topics, especially when you have gear that you have to play with in a lab environment. So we've actually bought all the gear and ship out kits to people so they can have them in their homes or wherever they happen to be and actually follow along on the videos. And we have a private Slack channel for the students where they can come in, they can interact with me and the instructor and all the other students. And honestly, I think this might be the future of tactical network solutions, with all the training, just doing it all online this way, because it's convenient for everybody. I personally like to have a live kind of interaction, but who says we can't take some of this technology we're playing with and actually have small groups of 5 people and actually interact for 4 or 5, 6 hours a day in a live session.
Well, hey, Gary, all right, you stay out there. I'll wrap up with these guys. Okay, all right. I represent the unsung heroes, those people like you guys who toil in anonymity. Gary was called away. Sorry about that, but he wanted me to tell you about this cool comic that I'm in, the Cyber Hero Adventures, Defenders of the Digital Universe. And he said, wow, this is great. We donate all these to anyone. You can go to cyberheroescomics.com, and he wanted me to show you some of these conference badges that he was at, which turns out is where he gets his superpower. And he wanted me to convey gratitude to Keith Fuentes and Terry Dunlap for this incredible podcast. I'm going to listen to it later. I'm really interested in learning about it. And speaking of learning about it, how should our audience get more information, Keith, about some of the cool stuff that you and Samsung are doing in cybersecurity?
I appreciate it. Just check out samsungknox.com. Look at some of our success stories. We can't wait to work with you.
All right, thanks. And what about you, Terry? Where should people go for some more information?
Depends on the color of your hat. If it's black and offensive, you can go to Tactical Network Solutions. It's tacnetsol.com. And if you're more into the defensive side and you want to secure your firmware and mitigate supply chain risk, go to refirmlabs.com.
All right. On behalf of a grateful digital universe, thank you so much for being real-life unsung heroes. If any of you in our audience want to participate on our podcast, Gary told me you should send an email to him over at Gary@cyberheroes.com. Stay safe, stay home. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Terry. Take care.